Hello BookTube, this is Weekly Reads. Ordinarily, I'd be filming this video on Friday evening at 6:30 Central Time. But for the past few weeks, Celebrity Big Brother has been airing, and the Friday episodes are 2 hours. So, filming Friday Reads in a thin 30-minute window, it hasn't really worked. So I've been trying to film earlier on Friday, and today I'm filming on Thursday because I want to also give myself a little bit more time for next week's readings. So I'm going to give myself 2 extra days from this week for next week. So I'm filming this on Thursday. Also, it gives me, I think, a bit more time to talk about what I've read this week. Disappointing though my reading experiences this week have been. So anyway, BookTube, let's get going with the books that I've bailed on this week. So this week's reading has been devoted to my paltry participation in FFS, February Fantasy Stories. February Fantasy Stories is a spin-off of New Worlds November, a BookTube event created by the Bookish Bryans and featuring a number of BookTubers as co-hosts. I myself was a co-host for New Worlds November, although I'm not a co-host for February Fantasy Stories. Of course, if you've been following along, I had a very rough New Worlds November. And February Fantasy Stories, about as successful. Although that said, I did kind of cheat a bit with David Mogo Godhunter last week. I mean, it's not shorter than 250 pages, but I kind of sort of included it. Because in a way, I think fantasy really works better as longer novels sometimes. But anyway. So, for this week, I started with a reread. I had a go at The Return of the Sorcerer by Clark Ashton Smith. Clark Ashton Smith is one of my favorite fantasy writers, although most of his work can better be described as horror. And The Return of the Sorcerer is the first collection of his that I ever read. And there's a whole story behind that, which I talked about last week. So, rereading this collection was a bit of a homecoming for me. It's been far too long since I read this collection. I do have 2 other collections by Clark Ashton Smith, which do feature a number of these stories. So, a lot of the stories in this collection brought back fond memories, and some I'm not that fond of. So, yeah, I mean, I think so. Some of the stories I really enjoyed on a reread, and a number of them I'm a lot less fond of. Like, say, for example, Beyond the Singing Flame, which is a sequel to The City of Singing Flame, which is an amazing story, although I think could have been better structured. If you're going to do a sort of what Clark Ashton Smith tries to do, just stick with the diary format. You don't need to sort of break it up into mini chapters. I mean, if you're going to go with the fiction that this is a found text, that what happened to the author actually happened, don't break it up by chapters. Anyway, and then Beyond the Singing Flame just, I don't feel was quite necessary. Um, I mean, I loved the Vaults of Yorvombus and the Double Shadow. Those are amazing stories. Um, all of the Torturers, again, wonderful. Really enjoyed it. The Dark Eidolon, which has been one of my favorite stories. Um, this time around, I sort of, I think the ending could have been better, but I'm not entirely sure how. It's the story of a sorcerer named Namira who enacts a cataclysmic revenge on the kingdom of Shylock for um, a moment of cruelty visited upon Namira as a young boy by the current emperor when he himself was a prince. Um, and the story is quite brilliant until I think the end, where the thing that gets the Emperor Zotula incensed was not the destruction of his court, the annihilation of his kingdom, but the uh, attack on his favorite concubine. Um, and then what sort of how the story ends. But anyway, I really like the Seven Geeses and the holiness of Zadarek, although the last few sentences could have been not there. And the Empire of the Necromancers. I like the first half, but rereading the second half, so the Empire of the Necromancers is about two necromancers, Matmuar and Sodosma, who are driven out of one country, and so they go to a dead country. Pretty much 200 years previously, the entire population was wiped out in a plague. And so they pretty much raise the entire empire again. But as the months or years go by, they kind of become lazy. Although the last emperor of Sincor, there's a spark of rebellion in him. There's something to where he remembers his past life, that he remembers that his current state isn't quite right. Even though all other of the race dead don't have this, it's like he has it, this memory. And so he goes to the first emperor, his many, many greats grandfather, and who was himself a famed wizard at his time. So they converse. The wizard kind of remembers as well. And then he recalls a prophecy that sort of these two kind of fulfill. So they go to the statue. It's hollow, and there's conveniently a key, a tablet, and a sword that's used to dispatch the two necromancers to open the door for the dead to pretty much end their enslavement, or really to free themselves from being living dead, and to punish these sorcerers. And it's a little too convenient, I thought. And while I don't know, I was frustrated. Because I do love Clark Ashton Smith's work and his writing style, even if it is a bit overly purple. And I love his Zothic stories, his Poseidonis stories, the Hyperborean, but I don't know. Anyway, I was kind of disappointed, but once I got to Griot, a Sword and Soul anthology, edited by Milton J. Davis and Charles R. Saunders, I started to realize that maybe I didn't really want to read this. Like, there's something I want to read. and it's not fantasy at the moment. It's not fantasy short fiction, but I don't know what it is. But anyway, going back to Griot. So, Sword and Soul is, I guess you could call it a spin-off subgenre of sword and sorcery, inspired by African history and mythology and culture. And I did not get on with this book at all. I skimmed the book and had a go at 3 of the short stories. So I read Marimbo Alienaswa, or Captured Beauty by Milton Davis, which is about a Conan-esque character who works as an enforcer for a merchant whose eldest son is no good, and it basically said eldest son paid somebody to kidnap a young woman to be his wife. It said kidnapper actually sold her to a wealthier individual, and the hero Chenga basically goes in pursuit of her. And eventually, I'm assuming after he rescues her, they enter into a relationship. And then I read or had to go at Skin Magic by P. Jelly Clark, which is about a former thief who has a magical tattoo, which I didn't care for. And then The Belly of the Crocodile by Minister Faust, which is about the narrator whose brother hates him or something, and it's actually, the entire story is basically a screed against said brother. Like, it's just bad. So I did not have much luck with this book at all. And then I had to go at The Golden Swan by Nancy Springer, which I picked up by largely for this beautiful cover by Rowena, who was a fantasy artist who worked in like the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. And I don't know if she worked much beyond that. The Golden Swan is the last in a series of fantasy novels by Nancy Springer. And in this story, Dare, a young prince of Isle who was born a wolf because his mother was in wolf form when he was born. One day when he is young, his father, the king of Isle, takes him to a seeress to have his destiny revealed. And during this sort of moment, he sees a young man with whom he's almost immediately smitten with. A year or so later, Dare goes in search of his destiny. He sees this young man, and they sort of rescue him, and they go on the fated quest. So I started the novel on Monday, and Monday was a very rough day for me for a number of reasons, up to and including having to going to my brother's for Valentine's Day, so me and my mom could spend some time with the 4 children of the apocalypse, my 2 nieces and 2 nephews. But Monday was rough in other ways as well. Going over to see the 4 children, that was rather pleasant for the most part. So I decided, okay, I'm going to come back to this on Tuesday. Like, have another go on Tuesday. And I made it a little further, but not much. The writing is atrocious. It attempts sort of a fairy tale or a sort of a Celtic mythological style that, I guess if you like that style, it works, but if you don't, it doesn't. And I didn't like it at all. And while the homoerotic elements I mean, obviously Dare is smitten with the young man Frame. I mean, there's not going to be any payoff for that. I think unintentional queer baiting before queer baiting was a thing. And if the two young men do sort of form a bond, it's either going to be incredibly chaste or nothing's going to happen. Or, you know. So I was rather disappointed. Anywho, so that pretty much wraps up my reading for most of this week. So when I was thinking about kind of what to do about Thursday and Friday, and also knowing, of course, that Celebrity Big Brother is coming on tomorrow night, I'll just film and also that my library tour for today was going to be short because there was only 6 books, but I could get my weekly reads in today, and then start early on next week's readings this week. So that's what I'm going to do. But before I get to what I'll be reading this coming tonight and Friday and into the weekend and next week, I do want to talk a bit about the sense that I really don't want to be reading this. That, I have a sense that I either really want to read a whole lot of manga, even though I'm resisting that because I pretty much read everything I've got, or I'm really wanting to read some of my modern and contemporary fiction back here, even though I don't really have a whole lot of that. And I'm working my way to adding some more. So I don't quite know. We shall see. But what I'll be reading this coming week, or starting today anyway, because I'm filming this during my weekday filming period, is I'm going to start on some books I selected for the BookTube spin. And hopefully I'm not jinxed. So I'll be starting on The Impeachers, The Trial of Andrew Johnson and the Dream of a Just Nation by Brenda Wineapple. I have read Brenda Wineapple's Exotic Nation and really enjoyed it. So I'm hoping I'll really enjoy The Impeachers as well. And then once I finish The Impeachers, I will be moving on to American Comics, A History by Jeremy Dauber. And hopefully I will enjoy it and I didn't jinx myself. And if I have any time next week after Impeachers and American Comics, I will read either South to Freedom, Runaway Slaves to Mexico and the Road to the Civil War by Ellis L. Baumgartner, or reread A Little More Red Sun on the Human by Gillian Conoley. This is a selected edition of her poetry in which Conoley does something quite unique. Normally in a new and selected poetry collection, the selected poetry will be organized by previous collections. Or in this situation, Conoley completely changes the order of the poems in a completely new format, and it's quite interesting. And I'm quite looking forward to having another read of this. Now, of course, if I don't have, depending how much time I have at the end of next week, will probably determine which of the two I pick out. But I'm hoping it doesn't bleed into next weekend or into like the last 3 days of February, because I do have a reading plan for those last few days. And I'll talk a bit more about that next Friday when Celebrity Big Brother will finally be over. So if I don't get to either South of Freedom or Little More Written on the Human, I'll read South of Freedom sometime in March, hopefully. And I'll read a little more written on the Human in April, because I'm planning something regarding poetry in April. Again, hoping I don't jinx myself. Speaking of which, while I was thinking about doing this video, and given all of the troubles I've been having so far this year, which I normally do have a bit of a reading slump or reading struggles at the beginning and end of the year. But also, I've noticed that when I make reading plans or reading projects or join in on BookTube reading events and challenges, that I tend to jinx myself. I tend to, in either making these plans or in announcing them, that I almost invariably end up not liking the books I'm reading or bailing on them. And it's rather frustrating. So maybe I should make a rule to not mention it and see if that helps. Or just go with the chaos and mood read to my heart's content. I don't know. But anyway, BookTube, that was Weekly Reads. I will be back because I'm going to be putting this up on at 6:30 Friday. So I'll be back again on Monday with part 2 of science fiction and fantasy, and whatever other videos I decide to make next week, in addition to, of course, the long library tour. But so anyway, yeah. So thank you, BookTube. Have a great evening and weekend, and I will see you on Monday. Thank you, BookTube.